I look like I'm sleeping in that feed. No, I'm here.
Hello and welcome to episode 77 of React Native Radio. I'm your host, Nader Dabit. Today on our panel, we have Peter Pikarczyk.
Hey, everybody.
And today our special guest is Jennifer Van. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's great to have you here. I've met you a couple times in person. Saw your talk at React Rally, and I thought it would be a good topic to kind of go over here. The topic we're going to be kind of discussing today mainly is going to be, what you talked about there, which was scaling enterprise React apps. So before we get to that topic, can you go ahead and give us a quick intro and also maybe talk about how you got into programming?
Sure. I am a senior full stack and machine learning engineer at Capital One. And I got into programming kind of like a long story. Do you want the long story or the short?
Yes, we'll take the long story. And if it gets too long, I'll stop you.
Story.
Woo. Okay. So I was like 3 years ahead in math by the time I was in ninth grade. And I thought, would be great if I could monetize this. So I was like, okay, I'll join the robotics team at school because, robotics is like applied math and like I can actually make a career out of this. Went to join the robotics team, and the senior engineers there had me organizing wires by color type and by size, and they like wouldn't let me program at all because they were like, you're just better suited for these wires thing, like you have like an eye for organization. And then I didn't get back into, I was completely appalled. I hated it. I did it for like 9 weeks because I really wanted like desperately to be in this community, and I felt really out of place and underutilized. So I completely left. I didn't come back to tech until I was back in college, probably like 21. And I had gone through like half of an art degree, all of a math degree. And then I was like, I really keep coming back to wanting to do programming. It was like a long time before I felt like brave enough to do it again. But this time, like I was more vocal about what was holding me back and finding mentors to help who like slapped me silly and were like, you can do this. Don't quit this career. And that's kind of just been like my story just in general, is like me kind of getting downtrodden by people telling me that I can't do programming and then doing it anyway. And then somebody staying and like advocating for me and saying like, you can do this. Like me speaking at React Rally was a lot of Mark Erickson and Gant Laborde like helping me with my abstract. And I honestly don't think I would have gotten quite as far if they hadn't given me some feedback and like pushed me along and said like, you can actually do this. Like it's not just like a thought, like you can apply and you could get accepted. And then I was. So yeah, that's like the long story.
So what was your path from like when you decided to go back into programming in college to Capital One? Was it, did you like end up switching your major again? And then like, or did you just kind of take what you learned with math and art and then kind of start doing it on your own?
Yeah. So I don't know. I just wanted to do something. It's just like a super long story, but, I ended up like short story going back to school for computer science because my math degree with art just like wasn't cutting it. And everywhere that I went actually didn't take me seriously. Like I applied for a programming job, and my director at the time said, he sat me down, he told me to stop thinking Chanel and to start thinking like a scientist. And I quit like within that week. I was like, I'm done. And he had me on like graphic designing work. And I was like, I don't know how to emphasize to you that I have a degree in math. I don't know why you're putting me on graphic designing. So I don't know. I guess it felt like really necessary for me to get like a degree in it. Got a degree, like went back to school for another degree in computer science. And I thought like, I've always been scared to do something that I wasn't completely sure that I could do. And so I wanted to get into machine learning, which was very new at the time. and I joined an academic research lab there, a computational biology one. And it was exciting. It was fun. I learned a lot. I had a lot of academic freedom, but I didn't have any, like, specifically speaking, like, I just had a folder on my computer desktop that said like test, and it was a bunch of scripts, like script 1, script 2, script 3, script 4, and I would change like something small in my algorithm, and I had to bring someone new onto my team, and I realized that I couldn't build a new feature, and I could barely explain like how it worked or like my thought process for how I changed things. And although academia was fun and exciting because there's this tight timeline to publish something novel as quickly as possible, I realized that I didn't have this background in building something scalable and robust and something that could grow over time and something that I could pass off to someone else. And so I decided to move from academia into industry. Ended up at Capital One specifically because they said they had a huge data set, financial data sets out, a crazy amount of them. And they said I could play with them with machine learning. And I got there first day and they were like, all right, you're a full stack engineer. And I was like, oh, this is not what I was expecting.
So I was going to say, like, how does the machine learning thing kind of get into the whole React thing? But I guess you kind of answered the question there. How are you using React at Capital One? And like, obviously it was something that you weren't really going into the job, like, knowing that you were going to be doing, but like, how has that whole like situation unfolded, I guess you'd say?
Like, how did I start using React?
Yeah. So I guess you went in as like a machine learning engineer and then you kind of started doing full stack stuff.
Yeah. So this is really funny. I was on a team of one, me, and I was the only person working on the front end piece of it. And nobody else really had like a whole lot of experience. And they actually sat me down and were like, okay, well, we can either use Angular 1, maybe Ember, maybe Backbone, or we could use this other thing. We're not really super sure about it. No one in the company is really using it. It's called React. And I said, okay, well, what's the difference between these two? Like, why is there a dichotomy? Why do most people choose Angular 1? And the answer was, quote unquote, it's just always been that way. And that was not a good answer in my book. I didn't like that at all. They wanted me to pick the tech stack, basically. And I said, okay, well, how about this? Beyond what we know, why don't I build 2 proof of concepts that kind of like a skeleton structure of what you want, and then I'll show you some performance metrics, and I'll show you why one or the other is better. And React was a lot faster, performant, easier to understand. The state management was more upfront with Redux, but that was something that we decided that we were going to do because of how inherently difficult the web app already was with multiple users, complex data sets, all of that. And they loved it. They said, all right, now you're building it. And I was like, well, crap. I'm in now. So yeah.
So can you talk about how you presented that talk to React Rally and kind of give us a quick abstract about what you talked about for people that haven't seen it, and then we can kind of maybe start getting into the topic, I guess.
Before we do that, I just have one more question, if you don't mind. Can you talk a little bit about how you balance like machine learning and React at work? Like, do you still do one or the other? Like, do you like switch off like every month or every period of time? I'm personally interested because I'm going to be in that position shortly. So how does that all kind of work out?
Sure. So good question. I currently split it 80-20, and then I just pick whichever one that I want to concentrate more on. So whether that's 80% like machine learning, which is right now, and 20% React, which is something that I'm trying to do in terms of data visualizations and like explaining the machine learning algorithms that we use and the use cases associated with them. And it's kind of nice because when it's an 80-20 split, one full day can be dedicated to something. And I feel like that's easier than like an hour each day because context switch is expensive. So I just try to put it as one dedicated day to doing like web development, data visualizations, and then 4 other days dedicated to other machine learning work that I have.
That's awesome. So you kind of use React to sort of express your thoughts and opinions on the data set that you're working with, right? Like it's almost like you're telling a story, but you're doing it with React.
Yeah, totally. So there's this huge problem where we kind of just like blindly trust machine learning, and we say like, oh, well, this is like here, and I'm just gonna like chuck some data at it, and I'm just gonna trust whatever comes out of it. And I think that data visualizations is crucial for machine learning to keep going as a legitimate field for everyone beyond like the big already like machine learning innovators. They're the big people in it. Because if you can't understand what it's doing and you can't understand why it's right or why it's wrong, then it's not really grounded in anything besides like, hocus pocus, I guess.
Yeah, totally. So now with these graphs, or is this just sort of like a presentational UI, or is this something that maybe your like execs or higher ups take a look at and say like, oh, what if I click this? Will it like show me this or run this like regression or whatever?
Yeah, sure. So it's twofold. One is presentation. So we built currently like it's in the works, a work in progress, but we're building a data visualizations website similar to like OpenAI has like explanations for like how things work. Cola, GitHub.io just like shows you how different algorithms work. We want that to be public facing. We want to explain what we do and how we do it. And whatever use cases that we apply, we have applied it to. But then on the other side of that, we've taken out the structure from that we've built on like in the code, and we're trying to pass that along to our machine learning engineers so they can run their own stuff through it and they can visualize it and they can say like, okay, now my data set is in here. It's not dummy data. I can kind of see how things are being separated, why the algorithm chose this versus this. So it's twofold. It's definitely for like the developers, but also for public facing. And that was always the intention.
That's so cool. Like, so you're empowering a lot of your engineers to be able to write their own stories too, right? Like that's like the interesting part because, a lot of the times in like a business, like workplace, we have to sort of prove that what we're doing is working in one way, shape or form, right? Just to kind of like say like, hey, like, you're paying me, like, and I'm giving you a return on your investment. So, like keep me on or whatever. But I think it's like cool when you can build a tool internally that other people can use, and sort of like help push their data along to the people that, like to see it, like your manager, maybe somebody higher up, like an exec, for example, it's like, wow, like, this is what we've been able to accomplish with machine learning. Let's pump, an extra $2 million next year into our budget, and see what they can do with that,
So, like, do you think that like JavaScript developers, there's an easy path for them to like just I like kind of dive into machine learning and kind of get to know it, coming from someone that you have like a different background probably than JavaScript developers. You have a mathematical and computer science degree and all this stuff, and I'm at least, in my experience, a lot of the JS developers kind of may not come from that background, or maybe they do. But in general, we're like, maybe not working with the low level mathematical stuff that much. So what would you say for like a JS developer to kind of dip their toes in machine learning? Like what would be an easy path for them? For me, it's been looking at Python with scikit-learn. But of course, I don't really have a mentor to like help me out. It's kind of what I learned on my own. I'm kind of curious what your opinion would be.
Yeah, totally. So I think this is like the way that I tackle it, and the way that I suggest everyone tackles it is to try to walk away understanding like intuitively why something works and being able to take something. And I think there's a big obstacle for many people where they hear the word machine learning and they're like, wow, well, I don't know math and I don't know calculus. So like I'm getting confused by these formulas and I'm not really sure like how this works. Right. And they get scared and they don't really want to mess with it. They're like, I don't really want to do anything. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. But we do that all the time with different JavaScript frameworks. We just pull it out of the box and we start playing with it and start seeing how it works. And I think like if you get a Python notebook running, you take a data set, pick like the handwritten data set, the MNIST one, and then run a few different algorithms on it and really, and like tweak it and see how it changes and like try to understand what it's doing and like walk away with a high level understanding of it. I think that's probably one of the easiest ways of doing it. And like, again, like not getting discouraged when you see like a formula. I think like honestly, whenever I see a formula thrown at someone in a machine learning explanation, it's a cowardly way of explaining it because like that's something that you can understand maybe, but it's completely inaccessible to like 99.99% of the audience.
Yeah, I agree.
Like,
That gets on my nerves.
Yeah, I highly criticize those people. I'm like, that's the lazy way of doing it, and you're making people feel bad, and they're too scared to ask a question. They're too scared to ask how that formula works because they don't want to seem stupid.
Yeah, I end up like cracking open my like textbooks and shit, and then going on Google and trying to look up what all these signs mean, and then I get like completely just confused, and I usually give up at that point, and then come back to it later and just skip over that part.
Yeah, most people. So it's like it's this really bad problem that happens a lot in any topic that's difficult is that you open a tab in Wikipedia and then you look at the first word and then you open the next tab for that word and then you keep going into Wikipedia deeper and deeper and deeper until you're looking at the word like earth and you're like looking at the definition of like what that means and like that's not useful, right? Like I feel like you got to like pull people out and say like don't get hung up on the details. Like at the very beginning, try to grasp onto the high level details, try to understand like what you're trying to walk away with, what you're trying to understand intuitively how it works, and then play around with it. We play around with stuff all the time. We break it and we try to understand why. But I think like web development has this like, I don't know, like the community is so strong and people are so willing to just answer questions, you know, and if people in machine learning were more, I think, willing in that community to just say like, oh, like, let me try to explain this to you, which is also like why I'm stuck on I'm like obsessed with explaining machine learning, you know, because like there's not a lot of great explanations out there. And I feel like maybe like 20 years ago, there maybe wasn't like a great explanation of front end development, but somebody did it. Somebody said, you know, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to try to explain what I know. And then people just kept explaining, you know, it in an easier way and building off of that. Like it has to start somewhere. So.
Yeah. I feel like the way like I've been approaching things, maybe others do too, but like with like programming and now like even like some of this like other stuff like machine learning and data science, like you kind of skim, you know, like I feel like the better I get at programming, the more exact I get, you know, and like I need to know exactly what this line in this function does. But when I first started, I'd be like, oh, I'd skim a file like a article that I'm reading on like the Washington Post, you know, like, oh, like I'll read a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you know, like paint a picture for myself. Like, and I see a lot of like younger programmers do the same thing, and I'm like, no, like you have to understand every line, you know. But it's like it takes time to get there, you know, like just like how you're saying with like machine learning, like don't like Google every single word, you know, just like read everything, you know, maybe skim it or whatever. You kind of zoom in every time you take another stab at it and get a little better and a little better and a little better.
Yeah. And I'm not going to lie, like it is based off of math. So it is something that you like most people are not mathematically oriented. That's why we rely on computers to do things for us. So I would also say that the uncomfortableness that you feel like seeing an equation, I have a math degree. I still feel uncomfortable. I'm just like, huh, all right, let me look up what this symbol means again. Oh gosh, this is a lot. So I don't know. The high level thing is good. Skim it. I don't even read like every little thing. I'll come back to it when I need it, but you know, just walk away with what you need.
So I guess with that, we can go ahead and continue, I guess, talking about the React stuff, even though this is pretty interesting. But can you kind of give us a high level overview of kind of what you talked about at React Rally, and then we can kind of go from there, I guess.
Sure. So high level view of what I talked about at React Rally was basically the inspiration for my talk and for everything that I try to talk about is what do I wish I'd known when I had started. And this entire talk, I think, had hit a lot of different points, but they were all points to me that I wish I had known when I started. Things like, how do I make my React and Redux code better? That's like one component of it. The second component of it is, how do I build a community of developers, like my own team, to be positive and to keep growing? So how does that scale? That's the second part of it. And then the third part was like keeping in mind my users, like how do I scale with them? So the idea that I'm never going to know who's going to be using my web app. So I have to anticipate the fact that there are different accessibility needs. And that was something that I was really sad to say that I didn't really understand until later. And then I realized that a visualization that we had actually wasn't accessible to like a few critical people who had just joined the team. And I was like, oh, wow, like this is something everyone should be talking about more. And I see a lot of times getting made fun of too, because it's a lot of work to consider like the way a web app or something is consumed when that's not like your own mindset, or it's not like the way that you consume it, but it's valuable. And I thought it was worth talking about.
What are some of the things that you all have done, I guess, at Capital One with React and those terms? I know you mentioned that you had built something and you had some people come onto a team and you had worked with accessibility, but does scaling also does the entire, I guess, idea also involve like project structure and kind of initial decisions that are kind of made and making sure that as the project grows, those don't kind of get out of control? And like, what are what's, I guess, some advice that you've kind of learned in those areas?
So I think a lot of times, one of the first things that we spent a lot of time going back and rebasing was the fact that our code structure was built off of just what came out of like other boilerplates. So it had like components and containers, and it was actually really valuable for us to kind of get rid of that and just have components and then just have different features, and then having like their associated reducers inside of them and their associated components within them and the containers within the same file. And it would made it really easy for us to find the associated reducers, all of like the entire tree that was associated with one feature. And I think that was really hard for us to understand. Like we kind of just took this component container structure like as it was in boilerplate, accepted in boilerplate. And it was really hard for us to switch between them and say like, okay, well, like we have to kind of agree on like this naming structure and like nav bar something, nav bar something, nav bar something. And it's like you're back and forth and you're like, this is terrible. I hate this. And now I have to go between like reducer and like see where these things are all connected. And we end up drawing this like really complicated graph. And we're like, why don't we just organize these by the feature? And it just made things much easier for us to okay. And also on top of that, it also made it easier for us to onboard new people because we were able to say like, this is everything associated with this. If you want to change it, just change everything in here.
So like when you organize by feature, so you obviously are using Redux, but so when you organize by feature, I guess you'll have like a folder that has like the container that like gets the Redux stuff, but do you also keep the Redux actions and stuff like within that folder? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. It's just, and it's a little bit redundant because you have like reducers and actions in each of them, but if you can organize them correctly, it's pretty sweet. It's pretty, I like when code explains itself, including the structure.
Yeah, I think I've seen that structure work good lately for us as well.
I love self-explaining code. That is like my favorite thing. I get, you know what? Sometimes I am sure, like in my old jobs, my coworkers used to just be like, "That prick," and there's like, because I would like want things to be like formed like a certain way, and I'd be like, "Oh, this just feels so like elegant," But I also know like sometimes it's like just get the fucking work done and like leave a comment in there, But it's like, oh, when I get the self-explaining code, I'm like, this is awesome.
Yeah. But it's a trade-off because there is some redundancy in there in like reducer action over and over and over again, but it was worth it.
So I guess, I'm just kind of curious, this is just a general, because I'm actually starting a new project with React, and I was trying to go with CSS modules for the first time, but I got about a couple of days into the project and I learned to kind of not really like them. And I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but I've gone back to CSS and JS, and I'm using Glamour, and I'm back to my old workflow, and it's feeling really nice. I'm kind of curious what you use at Capital One, or at least what you're using right now.
So we actually used CSS and JS. So it's pretty self-explanatory to us. It's pretty easy. Glamour's also up there. But we tried to adopt styled components, like trying to move to that. And it was a huge slow down for us. And I don't know if people talk about that enough, is that it's pretty slow. So, and like that was what I was talking about earlier was in my talk was how do you make sure that things show up on the screen as quickly as possible, or the minimum structure. And if it's taking this long to like import styles, it was actually unacceptable for us. And we had to like go back to CSS and JS and Glamour. So I don't know.
Peter, have you had any experience with CSS modules?
Oh yeah. CSS modules for CSS modules for sure. They were fun during the time. I came from the Sass world, so like writing out a bunch of different like files, having that one entry point, and then just like compiling on the side, right? And then CSS modules came next, and it was just like, oh, cool. The only thing that I absolutely hated was like importing, like importing like those globals.
Yeah, exactly, right? That's exactly why I'm not liking it. I mean, that's not the only reason, but that's the main reason.
But check out Emotion. Kai has been killing it lately, and like Emotion 8 is twice as fast as Emotion 7. Emotion 7, like if you look at the benchmarks, just blows everything out of the water and supports every API. He's been killing it. Like this has been his like passion project, and going from any like CSS and JS or CSS modules like super simple, and like it's got a very simple API and is like super fast.
Oh, you mentioned this. Does this support like hover and media queries and all that stuff?
Yes, and like he's constantly like releasing new builds, whether it's like performance or feature set. So I haven't like done anything. There's no reason for me to look for anything else because this has been awesome.
I'm going to definitely look at this. I know you mentioned this once, and I haven't looked at it since. So this is cool. So, like you mentioned, naming conventions earlier. Like that's just such an important decision that needs to be made. Like in general, especially when you're working on like a project you're going to scale, and like if you make a few small like wrong decisions at first, it gets completely out of control, and then you hate yourself like about a week or two later, and you hate everything about the project, and it just completely sucks. So, yeah. Do you have any advice on like, I don't know, like just making the right decisions at the beginning of a project, or is it just more like just learning from past mistakes and stuff like that, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I've gotten in an argument with someone over if something should be past tense or present tense. So like, I get it. I guess like my opinion on that is like everyone has their own opinion on it, and it's just something you kind of have to hash out with your team, and you can try to like anticipate it the best that you can with like planning ahead of time, and like how are you going to push features out and kind of decide on that as a group. But I don't know. I try to keep them simple. I try to keep them, again, like self-explanatory code, but I'm not really sure beyond that.
Naming is so hard because like you you have to like you want to come up with like the right name. You want to be descriptive, but you also maybe don't want to be like too long sometimes, right? Like somebody called me out for having like a super long like iOS style function name, and I was like, well, that just sort of made sense, I guess, you know.
No, I get it. Like I've gotten in arguments with someone who said like it was like 2 words too long. And I was like, okay, well, I was trying to explain it to you so that I wouldn't have to sit here and explain how my code works.
It's either write the function 2 like words longer or like write an entire line of comment to explain what the hell is going on.
I know, yeah. And like again, like you can write comments. Okay, so this is like slightly related, but just like how you never really want to use like a tooltip because no one's ever going to read it, like you can write comments all day long and some like most of the time people won't read it. And that's like unfortunate. And you kind of have to rely on like this structure that like at the very beginning we have like the container and then we have like some like the first component inside of it and we try to like comment to it and like have self-explanatory naming conventions. But like, I don't know, it's all different for each person, but we try to, I don't know. Yeah.
So this has nothing to do with anything we were just talking about, but JSConf Asia 2018, that looks like a cool conference if you want to submit a talk to that. It'll give you a reason to be able to go to Singapore for possibly for free.
Wait, which conference was that?
JSConf Asia 2018.
That's awesome. I have to.
Yeah, I submitted a workshop. I don't know if I'm going to get accepted or not, but we'll see.
Oh,
this website is out of this world. What is going on here?
And I think to do the call for speakers, you have to go to their Twitter, and they have a link to it posted at the top because I don't see it on their website anymore. Actually, I never did see it on their website. I only saw it on their Twitter account.
Cool. I'll check it out. Thanks.
Sure. I guess in general, is there anything else that you kind of wanted to cover? Just regarding, the topic of scaling, web apps for enterprise. When I say enterprise, you work with a company, that's really large, Capital One, and the concerns there, may be slightly different than the average company. I think, in general, maybe, with a startup, they're less worried about sometimes getting all of the exact decisions right. They might be worried about iterating more quickly. Whereas like with an enterprise or a corporate type company, they're okay with taking things a little slower and still, and be able to go back and make the correct decisions. But I guess just in general, that do you have any advice that would kind of go along both of those paths for people that are kind of interested in it?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that my talk was kind of, I don't know, it recommended a lot of things, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think that they're always necessary for every single project, just to your point, right? So like if it's small enough, you don't necessarily need to worry about, I don't know, like a file structure getting, like that really helped us as we got to like hundreds of components, right? And you don't want to look through like thousands of things and like trying to figure it out. But if you only have like 10, maybe it's not totally necessary and the component container thing is fine. And again, like I also talked about like going through your optimization and like trying to make sure that your children aren't rendering unnecessarily. And that was something that if you have tons of components like we do, then it's very noticeable because it's just compounding slowness added. So again, like these things don't really matter if it's not something that like is not necessary for you. And again, like sometimes it's one of those things that you don't know to do until you start doing something small and then you kind of grow into it. And I think that's like a common misconception is people think like, oh, I have React, I have to use Redux. Oh, I saw Jennifer's talk, I have to do all of these different things. I have to look at my performance tab and I have to look at the network calls. And I'm like, no, maybe not. Maybe just start building something. And then as you feel the squeeze, as you feel that certain things are slowing things down to an unacceptable means, start coming back to my talk and like seeing what can be added or what can be optimized in that way. But I don't think you have to necessarily start off with all those things immediately. But I think those things in mind can be helpful, so you know immediately where to turn to.
You mentioned Redux, and this has nothing to do with the topic really in general, but I've noticed I've been working with a lot of companies lately that have been moving to MobX, and I'm like a big Redux person. I always go in teaching Redux and kind of recommending it, but I also am unbiased because I don't like to bring any unjust bias, because some people might like MobX for whatever reason, and it works really great. But the more I've been working with MobX, I'm kind of starting to like it, and I'm starting to kind of be less biased. I'm kind of starting to be kind of completely even-handed. Have you all worked with MobX in any production stuff?
Not in production. I think, like, to your point, it is harder for us to change things, especially when it's mission critical. But it is something that's being tested right now, because we do like the idea of just passing down what's necessary and subscribing only certain parts to certain parts of the store. And like, again, like that kind of just makes sense. You're like, okay, well, why do I need it all in one place if I can just chunk it out? But to be determined, I guess to say. But it is appealing, and I can see people's preference for it.
Yeah, especially in a workshop, because like we spend like an hour just getting like Redux boilerplate lined up to spit out like an array of people to like render, and then we switch to MobX and we get it done in like 10 minutes, and it's hard to show the real difference. Like it's hard to show that maybe one or the other is better depending on your philosophy and stuff, because all they see is like it working in 5 minutes and the other one working 1 hour, and they're like, oh, MobX is just so much better because it's so much easier. But what about you? Have you, Peter, been working with MobX at all?
No, I've only been using just like internal state now with like React 16 and all the stuff they've been saying, like how none of the external state management libraries will make your code fast. Using an external state library actually slows down React. So
yeah, I mean, I don't really use it for the speed. I think it's just for the complexity for me, especially when I'm working with like tab navigation and all this stuff. It's easier just to have.
Oh, yeah. I for sure use Redux everywhere else, but I was just like, well, let's see if I can make this work without using Redux, and Reason also has Redux like built in, quote unquote. They actually renamed the stateful component to the reducer component, to sort of, I think, literally guide people in that direction.
Oh, cool. Well, before we wrap it up, is there anything else that you want to kind of talk about, Jennifer?
I can't really think of anything. Do you have any other questions for me?
No, but we definitely want to have you back on to talk about another topic about getting into the conference circuit and just kind of speaking in general, because we talked a little bit about that before we started recording, and I think that we all have some good insight there. It'd be a fun topic also.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I hope I share, again, like to your point, like I think that like what I talked about, maybe like people know 80% of it, but I'm hoping that somebody somewhere found it meaningful all in one place.
Yeah, totally. I think I read a quote one time that said like something like, every person you ever meet knows something that you don't know, or something like that. And I always try to keep that in mind when I give talks, because I'm like, I feel the same way. So.
Yeah. Or like so I was freaking out, and my manager actually told me, like, you're never going to please everyone in the room. The best you can hope for is that 20% will say, that was way too fast. I have no idea what you're talking about. I just started with this. Like 60% of them will say like that. I knew most of it, but like I learned something. And then 20% will trash it and be like, I knew everything. Like that was totally pointless. And like, that made me feel better, because I realized, like, yes, to his point, like I'm not going to please everyone. And two, I'm just going to go out there and just like hope that somebody takes something away, something interesting.
Okay, cool. Well, I guess we can go ahead and get to the picks then. Peter, do you have any picks?
Yeah, so this was a shameless plug, but I started something called the Dash Docs community. If you use Dash documentation, it's freaking fantastic, right? you get to download all your docs locally, and then like if you're ever on the plan, you get access to everything from React to Immutable to TensorFlow, any popular library. And there's a lot of maintainers, but sometimes generating and keeping documentation up to date, just like with any open source project, sort of, it gets hard to maintain, right? So, and you can't blame anybody for not keeping them up to date. So I said, why don't we all team up together and build a community around keeping these up to date? And right now we're looking for like best practices for generating documentation. Like something else I think would be great is building like a Gatsby site generator that automatically hooks into Dash, So like if we come up with like this is what we want documentation to look like, sans, colors, or fonts or whatever, let's automatically generate the offline docs, so that no longer has to be like a tedious process somebody's in charge of,
So I see the repo. What exactly, how do you view this, or how does this exactly work as someone that's not really, I don't really know a lot about Dash, so.
Yeah, so right now there's just like dev docs requests, which is like a bunch of different like issues, like I've just been personally opening up myself, and then I've been forking, like basically I'll reach out to some maintainers and I'm like, hey, I know, like this hasn't been up to date. I'd love to help. Like, are you willing to join the community? And like Bogdan Popescu, who wrote Dash, just joined up, and Michael Scherer, who had a lot of like the Facebook, documentations, just joined up. So like, it's obviously not something that we're like actively working on right now, but something like when I do have a second, I do want to like, it's like something I'm continually working on, not something that I'll just like do over the next week and be finished with it. It'll probably be like a 6-month, year plus project of just like collecting this documentation and coming up with an easy way we can keep everything up to date across all the different frameworks and libraries.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, man. Good job on that then. That's really cool. That's going to be helpful, I think, to a lot of people. So my pick, I have a couple of picks. The first is a blog post, and it was written by Curtis Temple from the Major League Soccer. They do a lot of cool stuff with React and React Native and universal components. He wrote a blog post, and he published it today, actually. It's called Up and Running with Universal Components. And it actually gave me a lot of insight about how, like, you would actually use them in a real-world project. He actually also goes over adding Lerna and using Lerna, and that's something I haven't really worked with yet, so it was super cool to kind of see this. It was a really good intro. In fact, it's probably, one of the better intros I've seen about universal components, because it's actually like a tutorial as well. So it's awesome. It's called Up and Running with Universal Components. Also recommend you to follow Curtis Kemple, actually is his name, on Medium as well. He has some good stuff. And then the second pick I have is Flutter. I gave a talk at React Native EU, and Flutter was part of it. And I spent a lot of time kind of understanding Flutter. Flutter is basically like a cross-platform iOS and Android SDK for building mobile apps, similar to React Native, except it's written in Dart. It does have some similarities other than it being cross-platform. It has a life cycle within its components or widgets that uses things like set state. I really got to know it writing my talk, and I really got to enjoy it. And it's one of the things that I'm kind of going to be pursuing in addition to React Native, because it kind of falls along the same line. So I think a lot of listeners that are interested in React Native might also be interested in Flutter. It's kind of just another similar thing to React Native. It's not probably going to be, in my opinion, as big because of a few reasons. One of those being that it isn't written in JavaScript. It doesn't target other platforms other than iOS and Android. But what it does have that React Native doesn't have, it actually has built-in UI frameworks like Material and Cupertino that are maintained by the core contributors. It also has a really good navigation library that's built and maintained by the contributors. And I think that's two things that React Native is kind of missing, and they kind of have that. They also have probably some of the best documentation. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and say it has the best documentation I've ever seen on any project ever in my entire life. I mean, and I'm not overstating that. It's actually amazing. Like, I feel like they must have like 10 people full time just writing the documentation because it's that good. So if you're interested in Flutter, I created the Flutter newsletter. And if you go to flutternewsletter.com, you can sign up. And also wrote a blog post called Flutter for JavaScript developers if you want to kind of get up and running with Flutter as a JavaScript developer. It's on my Medium blog. And then finally, my last pick is also self-serving. We have a React Native bootcamp coming up in New York, October 19th through 20th. I think at the time of this recording, we have like 9 tickets left. We also have announced a few other cities on our website. So if you go to reactnative.training in 2018, we have a few cities kind of lined up. And we're not announcing the actual like location or the date until we get some people kind of on the waiting list. So if you're interested and you're in one of those cities, go check it out and get on the waiting list so we can kind of know that we should come there. Jennifer, do you have any picks?
I have 2 picks. One of them is called Ian Goodfellow's book. It's called Deep Learning by Ian Goodfellow. It has one of the best introductions to machine learning of all time. The first chapter is super high level. It's what I send everyone to read when they want to learn more at like a very high level about the entire space of machine learning. And then they're able to like hone in and say, okay, like, what does this actually mean? Break it down. And it's phenomenal. The second pick that I have is this research topic that I'm actually doing right now. It's called generative adversarial networks. And I highly recommend that everyone check it out because it's the new hotness. But it's the idea that you actually train 2 neural networks against each other in kind of like a cat and mouse game. So one of the neural networks tries to create data, fake data that looks like real data. And then both of that fake data and real data gets fed to another neural network. And then that neural network tries to figure out if it's real or fake. And it goes back around and around and around again. And this is really important to the space of machine learning, like right now. Because if you look at all of the machine learning, deep learning conferences, this is the hot topic, is generative adversarial networks. It's the idea that it's a generative model. It's very good at what it does. And generation, being able to create something from literally nothing is pure magic. So I highly recommend, like, if you want to like get on the pulse of machine learning, that's pretty hot.
So that seems like super complicated. Like just the idea of a neural network in general is already complicated. The idea of getting 2 of them to kind of like work against each other just sounds like just completely I can't even really comprehend it. That sounds really cool. I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah. And there's definitely like a lot of really cool, like people are able to create complete data sets, like images out of nothing. So they're able to say like, hey, like GAN, I want you to make a fake image of a bedroom. And then out of literally noise, the GAN is able to make a very believable picture of a bedroom. It's able to like predict the next frame in a video. It's able to move someone's face from left to right if you give them the picture of just the left side of their face. It's really powerful. It has a lot of unanswered questions. It's very nascent in research right now. It's something that I'm researching right now, and I think it's very exciting. And it's very easy, like visually able to see the impact that's already having in machine learning.
I'm so excited. You're definitely going to have to share those resources online and stuff because like I kind of want to start like looking at it.
Yeah, totally. The funny thing is Ian Goodfellow's book is actually available like online. So like if you want to read it like right now, you don't have to like, you just Google it. It comes up pretty quickly. I'll actually Google it. I'll Google it. Don't worry. Let me Google that for you.
Oh yeah, one other pick is the Skype emojis.
Oh,
they're great.
Those are so gross. It's just like random stuff, but like the funny thing is there's a lot of people out there if you look around who do like study groups and they study together and they try to explain like chapters together to each other, and a lot of it is like remote. So like it's a really good book is what I'm saying.
Is it hard to grok for someone like us, or is it kind of something that's consumable?
I think it's extremely consumable. And I've read a lot of different books because I really do want like the intuitive understanding, because I want to be able to point to something and say like, this is the way that I want to explain it, or this is the way that I think someone else will explain it. And I try to always put myself in those shoes. So like out of all the different books that I've read a bunch of math ones, machine learning ones. This is like the best one, like one of the best ones. And if it's not, come back at me and tell me. I will try to explain what I can.
Well, Jennifer, it was really nice having you on. I really appreciate you taking the time out to join us.
No, thank you for having me. I was bragging and super excited. I was like, I'm going to be on the radio.
It was so excited to have you on.
I'm glad. Thank you.
All right. Well, that wraps up episode 77 of React Native Radio. Thanks for listening, and we'll see everyone next week.